match each equation type below with an equation on the right. So we're supposed to match these with these. So to do that, let's talk about, first off, what recursive means. What is a recursive formula? Recursive, it has p sub n minus 1 in it. And let me come down here, whereas an explicit formula, in fact we could probably just put these side by side so we can see the original. An explicit has n, not p sub n minus 1. Okay, so I'll try to make that more clear. Let's go on. So first off, we have linear. So a linear recursive, what does linear mean? It's going to add or subtract the same number every time. So linear recursive then would mean p sub n equals pn minus 1 plus or minus a number. Whereas, let me come down here and say exponential recursive is going to multiply the same number every time. So the nth term will have some kind of number multiplied by p sub n minus 1. So let me make this more clear by saying the n minus 1 is the previous term. But I write it right there. Previous term. Same thing here. Previous term. So remember what p sub n minus 1 is. P sub n minus 1 is the term before, the previous term. So it's saying any term, so for linear, first off, it's saying any term is the previous term, add or subtract a number. Whereas exponential is saying any term is the previous term multiplied by a number, because you're multiplying the same number every time. Now over here for explicit linear, well, let's hold on and let's go get the two recursive ones. So notice this has pn minus 1, right, previous term. That has pn minus 1, and that has pn minus 1. Those three are all recursive, aren't they? So it's recursive, recursive. Now, which one is linear? Linear just adds or subtracts the same, linear recursive just adds or subtracts the same number every time. So that would be this one, wouldn't it? See how it's just adding 6 every time? So that's linear recursive. So this one's B. And which one is multiplying by the same number every time? Well, that would be this one right here. It's times 1.5. So that's exponential recursive. Well then, okay, what about this one here? This one's doing both. See how he's multiplying by 1.5 and adding 6. That's recursive, but it's more complex. So it's really none of these. We don't have a more complex recursive. So that's none of these. That's too complex. So linear recursive just adds or subtracts a number. Exponential recursive just multiplies by the same number every time. It multiplies the previous term by the same number every time. Linear recursive adds or subtracts the same number to the previous term every time. When you do both of those, that's more complex. That's none. Okay, so now we're in position to figure out the explicit formulas. Now, explicit linear formula, remember, these have n on the other side, not p sub n minus 1. So that's going to be something of the form, it's going to be a number times n plus or minus a number. It's kind of like mx plus b. Well, it's linear. It's like having, you remember the equation from algebra, y equals mx plus b. Right? It's like that, but we're talking with p sub n and n. They're like the y and the x. So there's a number here and a number there. So a linear equation has a number multiplied by n plus or minus a number, whereas down here we can say an exponential. An exponential equation has a number in the front and another number with n up in the power. So exponential, the n is in power, in the explicit version of the exponential. So that's what it's going to look like. In fact, we usually write it as a times b to the n, like that. Why don't I just write it that way? A times b to the n. All right, so that's how it's usually written. A times b to the n, like that. Okay, and so let's go look for that. So that would mean these guys are both explicit. This one is clearly linear, isn't it? Linear explicit. There's D, and this one is clearly exponential, explicit, because it just has n. They both just have n. They don't have p sub n minus 1. They're not referring to the previous term. That's what recursive does. Recursive refers to the previous term. It recurs, like a dream that recurs, right? You have the same dream again. You refer to the previous dream. So recursive has the previous terms in it. These formulas here are explicit. This formula here and this formula here are explicit. They don't have the previous term. They just explicitly tell you about n. That's all they do. Just like that. So there we go. That's how to tell the difference.